Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tavach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it is dedicated in honor and in memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Hashalom, and Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Hashalom. It's also in schus and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz Le'erich Yom V'Shanim Tevis for long, healthy years. This program is also dedicated by Shmuley Weiss in honor of Rabbi and Edison Jacobson. So we continue in the latter part of chapter 9, Perek Tes of Tanya, discussing the king in the example of the two kings fighting over the small city, which is you and I, the human being. And its citizens, the king, called the divine soul, wants to completely control, but not control in an imposed fashion, but to persuade and inspire that even those that opposed him, the divine soul, should also be his allies. And we've been learning the different levels as we go through this process. So the love and passion of the divine, of the transcendent, of the divine soul, we've learned how it already is impacting the animal soul to the point that first it subdues it, and then it begins to change it until it transforms it. With both sides of the heart, the right side and the left side of the heart where the animal soul and its passions reside, are also transformed. And to get to that level, we have to climb from one level of love, the love that burns like a fiery passion, Ava Kadish B'yesh, to a higher level of love that's like water, called Ava B'tainugim, an Ava, the pleasurable love. And we explained the difference, that the love that comes of fiery passion is due to feeling the distance, the thirst, and that arouses a certain passion, a certain fire within you. There's a second level of love, deeper, that actually does not burn with such passion. It's actually much calmer, but it's because you're connected. You're not missing someone, you're not longing for them, you're now with them. So on one hand, it's not as loud and not as prominent and fiery, it's far calmer like water, but on the other hand, it's far more internalized. So it's far more transformative. Because when you have a love that comes out of a fire of passion from a distance, so that too can subdue the pleasures that come from the water of the animal soul. Being that water gives birth to everything and water makes things grow, as we learned in the end of chapter 1. But that still does not transform it. The love of pleasure speaks to the animal soul, because the animal soul understands the word pleasure. The problem is that the object of the pleasure of the animal soul is initially in the wrong place. But the very concept of pleasure it understands. On the other hand, the animal soul does not feel distance from the divine, because the animal soul is consumed with its material desires, survival, its own existence. But once you introduce a deeper pleasure, where now you're connecting with deep pleasure to the godliness, that speaks to the animal soul to the point that it changes it. And that's what the Alter Rebbe said. Let's read the lines we read already, but we'll read it again. So he says like this. After L'chol vavcha b'shnei tzerecha, he says, V'hainu, and this means that the love has begun with a fiery passion. Now it's sheyala v'yove v'yagia. It has risen and came, and v'yagia has reached. So it's like 3 levels right there. So you're in one place when you climb. Let's say you climb a ladder, you climb steps, so you're climbing. So there's the yale, there's the climbing from one state to a higher state. Yove means you've come, you've arrived. But yagia is you've reached. You actually come to peace, full destination. It's like in any journey. When you're traveling from one place to another, first you are traveling as you climb and reach that place. Then you reach the place, you arrived, you come. And I'm sorry, you've arrived, you've come there, but you haven't yet reached it, meaning that you haven't completely internalized it. Then you settle in, and that's v'yagia. Yagia also has a meaning in Likutei Torah Shmini. The Alter Rebbe says yagia ungerit, that it touches you deeply, like hazaza, a movement, a change, a shift. Nigia. So the same thing here, as the king, the divine soul is impacting the animal soul and impacting the small city and the citizens and elevating them. It elevates. Then it arrives and then it reaches. Lemadregas avarabba. So now it's reached a higher level of avarabba, a great love, v'chiba yisera. Great love and a chiba yisera, a more powerful form of endearment. Ava is love, chiba is affection. Chiba yisera, what greater than what? Memadregas ava aza kedish be'esh, which is more powerful than the level of the strong love like flaming fire. As we explained, because it's not the passion of distance, of missing someone, of longing for someone. It's actually the calm love of pleasure of having it, having reached it, having gained that level. Yala v'yagia. It's become internalized. So when you're enjoying, let's say, a loved one, a child, a parent, and you're meeting them, not when you're longing when they're distant. The love is not as pronounced, but it's far more internalized. It's like the deep waters, still waters that run deep. And that's far more transformative because it's touching the very essence of the person. As long as you long for something, it definitely demonstrates a connection. That's why you long for it. That's why it's burning. But once you gain what you've longed, then the pleasure is much more of resolution. More like shuv, not rotze. Fire is rotze. It's a tension. It's a seeking. It's a longing. It's a yearning, pining. Shuv is resolution. You've gained what you were seeking. So it's not less love. It's deeper, but less pronounced. Not as loud. It's like when you burn a log. So in the beginning, when you light a fire, it crackles because it's beginning to get used to and acclimate itself. So till it burns out some of the moisture or some of the other elements in the wood, it's still making noise. It's much more fiery, sparkles, crackles. The fire jumps. Then there comes a point where the fire catches. Yala v'yove v'yagia. You can see the three levels when you light a campfire, you light a fireplace. Then it comes to a point where it gets completely silent and it just burns very quietly. So on one hand, you say, hey, it's not as powerful as when the fire was really catching and fire was really flaming and jumping and flickering. No, because now it's come to peace. The wood has become completely absorbed with the fire that's burning. So the fire in the beginning is still a distant fire. The wood is still catching. But then the wood becomes consumed with it. And then it burns very quietly. But it's very deep. It's very internalized. And as such, it also transforms the person. And that's why it continues and said, this is, like he said before, this is what's going to create the true transformation. Not just the subduing, not just the iskafia, but transformation. And the Alter Rebbe tells us, what's the name of this love? Va'ava. V'hi hanikraz. This great love is called hinikraz bakosuv ava b'tainugim. pleasurable love. As we spoke, Shir Hashirim, Zayin, Zayin, 7-7. And that means, Lisaneg al Hashem, to take pleasure in God. Me'ein Elam Haba, resembling the experience of Elam Haba. So in Elam Hazeh, when you reach a level of love, because the world, the physical material world, is distant from God, so the love is not so natural to us. It's not watery, it's much more fiery. Like I said, the wood of this material world is burning with passion, but it's still an alien entity. When you say Elam Haba, in Elam Haba, there's no materialism. So the connection there is Nenim Ziva Shechina, enjoying the glow of the Shechina, of the divine. Mein Elam Haba. And perhaps that's why it brings Elam Haba, because that shows you much more of a natural love. The truth is you need both, and we want to accomplish it in Elam Hazeh. That's why we're not talking about Elam Haba, we're talking about Ein Elam Haba. There's pleasurable love. The Alter Rebbe continues now to explain what kind of love this is. And the more we understand that, we see then how it can transform the water and the pleasures of the animal soul. So let's continue. We learned this already, but it's always worthwhile going further and analyzing it deeper. Va'einughu, this delight that we're talking about, einig, he's introduced pleasure, not just love. So you can have a love with pleasure, you can have a love of fire, but it's not called love of pleasure. Pleasure, when we spoke about tainug, is different than rotzen. Rotzen, from the word rotzei, you're seeking, you're longing, you're driven to get there. That's also a great level, because imagine a person who doesn't even long godliness. He's so comfortable in his own comfort zone. So here the longing is a very powerful one, but it's still longing. And then there's resolution, the shuv. So pleasure is identified much more with that inner calm. It's very profound love, but it's a love that comes at the end of the process, once you've gained and have internalized. So he says now, the einig hu b'moyach chochmah. Where does it reside? B'moyach chochmah. Now we understand deeper what we learned earlier about the nefesh elikis, remember? Where does it reside? In the moyach, in the reflective mind. So on one hand, the reflective mind is detached because it is objective. It's not like the heart, that's subjective. That's where the animal soul resides in the left side of the heart, which is the subjective impulses of a person. The divine soul resides in the mind, the moyach. From there it goes into the right side of the heart, which is the primary source of the oxygen in the blood. And that's, so to speak, the combination of the moyach and the lev, that also, because remember, we want to also engage not just the mind, but also the heart. The king that's conquering the city doesn't just want to win their minds, he wants to win their hearts. But the mind plays a prominent role because mind and tainug are far more connected, whereas yearning, longing, is much more of a passionate, fiery thing. So the divine soul has both elements. It has the element of, in the mind, that calm that comes with the mind, that we're going to learn now, the pleasure, but it also goes into the right side of the heart, and all of that is going to impact the left side of the heart, which is the animal soul, as we'll discuss shortly. In Meichin itself, it's chochmah. V'seichel hamesanig ba'askolos Hashem v'yediosei. In chochmah, in intelligence, you can say, in conceiving, in inquiry and intelligence, chochmah v'seichel. Chochmah sometimes is chochmah and there's bina. Seichel is intelligence in general and chochmah. So that's where einig dwells. And why? Because this is how, so what is after shaykhus to tainug? Because when a person really understands something, there's a deep pleasure that's connected to it. B'haskolos Hashem v'diyosei. The pleasure of understanding God and knowing Him. As we see, when you understand something well, you enjoy it. There's a pleasure. But how does that contrast with the pleasure? Let's talk about firstly the pleasures of the animal soul. It's also pleasures, but it's pleasures in animal things. And even the pleasures of the heart of the divine soul, that's in the heart. So there the pleasure is more of a fiery sort. In the mind, the pleasure is far more of a calm sort. That's why you see. It's not the same thing when a person is reading or learning something and they get pleasure, gain pleasure. It's not like the same pleasure you have when you're eating something, even kosher, and eating it properly. It's a different type of pleasure. One is a far more, what's the word I want to use, more about your need. The other one is much more of a sublime form of pleasure. So we're talking about understanding God and knowing Him. Well, you can see here you have seichel, you have das, and it could be chochma, seichel, and das, as chochma, bina, and das, possibly. According to the limits of the person's intellectual grasp and vision. Why does the Alter Rebbe add that? Because he wants to show how it's personal. Each person according to their level. So when a person is longing for something, it's not so much of a seichel thing. It's your feeling, you're missing someone. You're missing godliness. So you long for it, fiery. When a person gains it, it's far more like the pleasure that's connected to Me'ech HaChochma. A more of a watery experience, calmer experience. And now, v'hi b'chinas mayim, hamayim. This is coming from the element of water. Remember, in the end of chapter 1, he spoke about 4 elements. There, Dal Yosei de Saroim, the negative elements. Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer. Spoke how each one has a different impact of the animal soul's negative personality types, traits. But there's also in Kedusha, Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer, of the divine soul. So the Eish of the divine soul is the Ava Kaddish Eish that we learned, a fiery passion for godliness coming from a distance. But then there's a Chinas HaMayim. That's the Ava B'Tainugim, Tainug, connected to Mayim. Because we learned there that Mayim, water, makes everything that's pleasurable grow. So there in the animal soul, what's pleasurable? Physical pleasure. All the taivas, the desires of the animal soul. What's pleasure for the divine soul? Divine pleasure. This is the level of Mayim. And here we're going to see how the Mayim of the divine soul is going to affect the Mayim, the pleasure of the animal soul. Because in the first level, the Ava Kiddush Be'esh, fire. So enough fire, the so-called heat of the fire like evaporates, you can say, the water, the pleasures of the animal soul. That's more subduing it. It's kafia. Here we're going to see a transformation. But first let's talk about B'chinas HaMayim. And then he goes on further. V'zera irzerua shebegdushas nefesh alikis is the level of water, and there's another name for it. V'zera irzerua shebegdushas nefesh alikis, and the seed irzerua, the sown light, irzerua latzadik, the expression in Tehillim, Tzadik Zayin Yud Aleph, which is within the divine soul's holiness. So this level of Mayim is also called Erzerua. Let's explain what that means. The Alter Rebbe, of course, in his vast and comprehensive manner, is covering all bases and wants to show this level, how it's described in all places, including in Zohar, which also helps us understand what kind of level of love this is. So this higher level of Ava B'Tainugim, so now we've associated, first of all, it's called Ava B'Tainugim, what he called before an Ava Rabba V'Chibi Yeseda, a greater and more powerful love and affection or endearment than the fiery love. This is the level, this is a Moich HaChochma, the pleasure level of Ma'amim, and now he's adding Ezera, Ezeru. What does he say in Zohar? In Zohar he says, and this is cited in Kabbalah and especially in Chassidus in a number of places, that the process of any development, there are three levels. Oir, Mayim, Rakia. So Oir is the most sublime. I mean, that just loosely, to explain it before we go into the details, you can almost just say like water is gas, liquid, solid when you freeze it. So oir is like the gas. It's more amorphous. It's more it's more sublime. Then it becomes like liquefies. That's mayim, and rakia, iglidu maya, is like water that's become now solidified, not just liquefied. That's physically, gas, liquid, ice. Spiritually, oir is a level that is more sublime. It's like light. That light will then turn into water, mayim, and that mayim will turn into rakia. Here the focus is obviously on the first step and the second step. What does he say? That the root of the water, which we're talking now is tainug, the ava b'tainugim, when was that created? That was created on day 2, right? When God divided the higher waters from the lower waters. Day 1, Yehi Oir. So Oir Mayim. So the first seed, that's why it's called Oir Zerua, is Oir, is light. That's what he calls it. And what means Zera here? Like a seed that's planted where? In the divine soul. As he says, Shebegdufish Nefesh Alekis. So you're seeding the sown light into the divine soul, and from that will emerge the mayim of the divine soul, the pleasure. That's what the Alter Rebbe is adding here. Okay. Now that we've established what this level is, you could ask why. So why do you need to add the Zera Zerua? It further strengthens the power of the divine soul where it's coming from, that it's originating from a level of Er Zerua. And therefore, when it impacts the person, or the Irktana Zaguf, including the animal soul, it has the power to transform it. So now the Alter Rebbe says, Hamahapeches L'toiv. So this level, which we called Ava B'tainugim, Shahu, let's do the right niggin. The Ava B'tainugim, the Sanag Hashem Ein Elam Haba. Va'eneg hu b'meich chachma v'seichla mesanig b'askol Hashem v'diyosei k'fi asog esichli v'chachmosei. V'hu b'chinis hamayim v'zera er zerua shebekdush nevskiz. So all this hapeches l'teiv. This sown light and this water transforms ma'apeches l'teiv to the good as b'chinas hamayim shebenefesh habamis, the level of water in the animal soul, which is the source shemehem bo taivus tainuge elam hazeh mitchila. As we learned in the end of chapter 1, so now the watery pleasures of the animal soul have a counter force. Not just a fire that's subduing it or evaporating it or pushing it aside, but transforming it, because now you're teaching the animal soul to have pleasure also in godliness. So the waters of the animal soul are transformed. So that which in the beginning, mitchila, was taivus, tanug elam hazah, is now being transformed. U'kamoshe kosa beitz chayim shar nun pere gimel b'shem hazoyer. And now he brings the source. As written in Eitz Chaim, section 50, chapter 3, citing the Zoyar, b'shem hazoyer, the Zoyar is chele gimel, Reish Ayin Zayin Amar Aleph, Chilek Gimel 277a. Now, what does it say there? Shara nepach liyastev gormur kamo yetzer tev. That the evil, you can say the impulse to evil from the animal soul, is transformed into pure good. Liyastev gormur kamo yetzer tev, on par, like the yetzer tev. And yetzer tev is the midas of the nefesh halakis. So what we said before, b'chol levavcha b'shnei yetzerecha, initially you can say b'shnei yetzerecha that you subdue the second yetzer, but the Zohar makes it explicit that it's a nepach. Nepach liyastev gomer. Why? Because the animal soul was also created by God. It's not doomed. It's just its nature is to follow its impulses, left side of the heart. And then there's also fiery passion. But pleasure is even deeper, because pleasure is the calm, cool pleasure of the animal soul in material desires. Tainuge elam haza. But now, as the divine love elevates from fiery love and passionate love to watery love, it transforms the very pleasures of the animal soul, meaning redirects them toward divine pleasures. You can also understand why it brings moyach here. Because if you just go heart to heart, anyone can win. But the moyach explains the pleasure of godliness that you have from understanding God. Like he said before, understanding God and knowing Him, that can be appreciated by the animal soul as well. And how is this done? B'hosir habgodim atzoyim mimenu. And here he makes it very clear. That is desire, remember, and the object of desire. The power of desire, pleasure, and the object of the pleasure. So initially, betchila, the object of the pleasure of the animal soul is in worldly pleasures. But now, b'hosir, this process of love, of conquering the city, step by step, has come to a point. It's removing habgodim atzoyim, shedding its soiled garments. Mimenu. So it's only garments, because the animal soul is manifest in these garments. Going back to the example of the city, the people who oppose the king, fundamentally not necessarily opposed, but they've gotten used to it. That's their behavior. That's their habits, their routines. But now you're removing those begodim atzoyim, those soiled garments, shem tanuga elam hazeh, shehu malubish behem, which are the pleasures of this world in which the animal soul is clothed. So when you put on clothing, that's not you. The clothing could be dirty clothing. That's the animal soul manifesting in worldly pleasures. So the only way to get anywhere, you have to remove those garments. Because even if you're clean, but if your garments are soiled, they affect you. So that's what he's saying. That's how we do it, by removing these garments, the soiled garments. And that allows the love, the pleasure of the divine soul to affect the love and pleasure of the animal soul and redirect it toward godliness. So we'll stop here. There's a few more lines in this chapter 9. And we'll continue next week. Everyone have a very good week. And it should be a very good Chodesh, the month of Kislev. You can go to TanyaApplied.com where you could see this and more previous programs, and also submit any question. Be well.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.